My name is Samantha, and at 28 years old, I never imagined my own family would accuse me of stealing $60,000 from my mother. The shock of standing in my childhood living room while my father pointed his finger in my face still haunts me. What hurts more than the accusation was how quickly they believed the worst about me without a shred of evidence. What they didn't know is that I had proof of what really happened. And revealing it would change our family forever. Before I dive into this painful story, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for your truth against people who should have believed in you from the start. Growing up in suburban Atlanta, we were what most people would call a typical middle-class family. My father, Harold, worked as a regional manager for a retail chain, and my mother, Martha, was an elementary school teacher until health issues forced her into early retirement. From the outside, we seemed like the perfect American family, but behind our front door, things were more complicated. Money was always a source of tension in our household. Despite both my parents working full-time jobs, there was constant anxiety about bills, unexpected expenses, and saving for the future. My father controlled every financial decision with an iron grip. Each purchase needed his approval. Each bill was scrutinized. And God forbid if anyone spent money without consulting him first. Even my mother, who contributed significantly to the household income, would ask permission before making personal purchases. Then there was my sister Jillian, 3 years older than me and the golden child of our family. While I struggled with finding my path, Jillian seemed to effortlessly excel at everything she touched. Straight A student, cheerleading captain, college scholarship recipient, and eventually, the proud owner of a marketing firm with her husband Thomas. At least, that was the story she told everyone. I took a different route. Art school instead of business school. Freelance graphic design instead of a corporate career. Moving to Philadelphia instead of staying close to family in Georgia. My choices were viewed with suspicion and subtle disapproval, especially by my father, who frequently reminded me that I could still change course and do something practical. Despite the distance, both geographical and emotional, I maintained contact with my family. Weekly calls with Mom, occasional visits during holidays, and financial help when I could afford it. When my mother was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition 5 years ago that required expensive treatments not fully covered by insurance, I contributed what I could from my modest income. The truth about our family dynamics became clearer as we aged. Jillian, for all her apparent success, was strangely dependent on our parents. There were mysterious financial emergencies that required loans from my parents. A new car when hers was supposedly vandalized. Unexpected house repairs that their insurance somehow wouldn't cover. Each time, my parents, especially my father, would rally to her rescue, dipping into their retirement savings without hesitation. When I once suggested they might be enabling her, my father dismissed me instantly. Your sister works hard and has bad luck sometimes. We help family in need. The subtext was clear. Jillian deserved help. I was expected to manage on my own. Last Christmas was the first time I noticed something truly odd. While helping my mother organize some paperwork, I came across several bank statements showing large withdrawals. When I asked about them, my mother became flustered and quickly changed the subject. My father entered the room at that moment and swiftly gathered the papers, commenting that I should focus on my own finances. That same evening, I overheard Jillian and my father arguing in hushed tones in his study. We can't keep doing this, he said. The accounts are getting low. It's just until the business turns around, Jillian replied. Thomas has big clients lined up for next quarter. They noticed me walking past and immediately stopped talking. Jillian emerged with red eyes but a forced smile, claiming allergies were bothering her. Through all of this, my mother remained the peacekeeper, always smoothing over conflicts and changing subjects when things got tense. Her health issues had made her more withdrawn over the years, increasingly dependent on my father for everyday decisions. Her once vibrant personality had dimmed, replaced by a woman who seemed constantly anxious about displeasing others, especially her husband and older daughter. I left that holiday gathering with an uneasy feeling, sensing that something was off with the family finances, but unable to pinpoint exactly what. My mother called more frequently in the months that followed, sometimes just to chat, other times asking oddly specific questions about my schedule, my visits to Georgia, and whether I still had access to their house key. Looking back, I should have recognized these as warning signs. By February, communication from my parents became sporadic. My mother, who typically responded to texts within minutes, would take days to reply. My father, never one for long phone conversations, stopped picking up altogether. Jillian became unusually friendly, calling to check in and suggesting we reconnect as sisters. Her sudden interest in my life felt forced and artificial. Meanwhile, I was building my graphic design business, landing a few significant clients that were finally providing some financial stability. I had even started putting money aside to help with my mother's medical expenses, planning to surprise them with a contribution at our next family gathering. The irony of what happened next still makes my stomach turn. The call came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in March. I was in the middle of a client meeting when my phone lit up with my father's number. Given his reluctance to call me under normal circumstances, I excused myself and answered immediately, my heart racing with worry that something had happened to my mother. "You need to come home now." His voice was cold, controlled anger barely contained beneath the surface. "Dad, what's wrong? Is Mom okay? Just get here today." He hung up without another word. I canceled my meetings for the rest of the week, booked an emergency flight, and arrived at my parents' house by evening. The atmosphere that greeted me was arctic. My father opened the door without a word and gestured for me to enter. In the living room sat my mother, eyes red from crying. My sister Jillian standing protectively beside her, and to my surprise, my Aunt Carol and Uncle Peter, who lived across town. "Sit down," my father commanded, pointing to the single chair positioned opposite everyone else, a clear physical representation of where I stood in this family tribunal. I complied, confusion and anxiety building as I noted their expressions ranging from disappointment to outright hostility. "Would someone please tell me what's going on?" I asked, looking primarily at my mother, who couldn't meet my eyes. My father paced the room, his face flushed with anger. $60,000, Samantha. $60,000 is missing from your mother's medical treatment account. The accusation hung in the air for a moment before I could process it. "And you think I took it?" "Why would I do that?" "Because you needed money for that business of yours," Jillian interjected. "Because you've always been jealous of what Mom and Dad have done for me." My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "The bank said the withdrawals were made over the past 3 months. Large amounts each time. I live in Philadelphia. I haven't been to Georgia in months except for Christmas. How could I possibly have made withdrawals from Mom's account?" My voice was rising now, the injustice of the accusation hitting me full force. My father slammed bank statements onto the coffee table. "These are the dates. February 12th, February 26th, March 10th. All days you claimed to be visiting friends near Atlanta." I felt the blood drain from my face. Those were indeed weekends I had told my family I was visiting my college friend Emma, who lived in northern Georgia. But I had canceled those trips at the last minute due to work commitments. I never corrected my family's assumption that I had gone. I canceled those trips. I was in Philadelphia working. I can prove it. "Convenient excuse," Jillian scoffed. "You always have a story." "Samantha." Aunt Carol shifted uncomfortably. "We don't want to believe this of you, dear, but the evidence." "What evidence?" I demanded. "Bank statements showing withdrawals I didn't make?" My father's voice rose to a shout. "Return the $60,000 or don't come back to this house. Your mother needs that money for her treatments." "You took Mom's money," Jillian added, her arm around our mother's shoulders. "We all know it was you." The room spun around me as childhood memories flooded back. The time Jillian broke my mother's favorite vase and blamed me. The missing money from my father's wallet that somehow ended up being my fault. The dented car that I was punished for despite being at school when it happened. Always, I was the one presumed guilty. The one who had to prove her innocence. This is insane, I finally managed. I would never steal from you. I've been saving money to help with Mom's treatments, not taking it. Then explain how the money disappeared on exactly the weekends you said you were in Georgia, my father demanded. I wasn't in Georgia. Check my work logs, my client meetings. Check my credit card statements showing I was in Philadelphia. More lies, Jillian said dismissively. You could have driven down, withdrawn the money, and driven back. My Uncle Peter, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Harold, maybe we should investigate further before making accusations. The bank already investigated, my father replied. The withdrawals were made in person, with ID and the account password. Only family knows that password. The implication was clear. I was the only family member who didn't live locally. The only one who could have taken the money without their knowledge until the monthly statements arrived. I looked at each of their faces, searching for any sign of doubt, any willingness to consider my innocence. I found none, except perhaps a flicker of uncertainty in my uncle's eyes. I didn't take the money, I said, my voice now steady with resolve. And I won't be accused of something I didn't do. I'll prove it wasn't me. My father's face hardened. Until you return every cent, you're not welcome in this house. Your mother is devastated by your betrayal. I turned to my mother, whose silent tears were breaking my heart. Mom, I would never hurt you like this. Never. She finally looked up at me. And what I saw in her eyes hurt more than all the accusations combined. Doubt. My own mother wasn't sure of my innocence. I think you should go now, she said quietly. As I gathered my things to leave, Jillian followed me to the door. Away from the others, her demeanor changed. Instead of anger, there was something else in her expression. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. You always thought you were better than us with your independent life and fancy art career, she whispered. Not so perfect now, are you? In that moment, a terrible suspicion began to form in my mind. The strange timing of the accusation just as my business was finally succeeding. The specific dates of withdrawals on weekends I had mentioned to my family. The password that only family would know. I left without another word. The slam of the door behind me punctuating the end of my relationship with my family as I had known it. They had chosen to believe the worst about me without question. Now I would find out why. I checked into a hotel near my parents' house, my mind racing with confusion, hurt, and growing suspicion. Sleep was impossible that first night as I replayed the accusations over and over, searching for clues to what might have really happened. By morning, grief had hardened into determination. If my family wouldn't believe in my innocence, I would have to prove it beyond any doubt. My first step was calling my bank to verify my own financial records. As I suspected, there were no unusual deposits in my account during the time frame in question. $60,000 doesn't simply disappear into thin air. If I had stolen it, the money would have gone somewhere. Next, I contacted my clients and workplace, requesting formal documentation of my presence in Philadelphia on the dates of the withdrawals. My co-working space had electronic entry logs showing I had swiped in early each of those mornings. But proving I didn't take the money was only half the battle. I needed to discover who did. The following morning, I visited my mother's bank. With a story about helping manage my mother's health finances and a sympathetic bank teller named Diane, I was able to review recent transaction records. The withdrawals had indeed been made in person as my father claimed, but what he hadn't mentioned was that they were processed by the same teller each time at the branch closest to my parents' house, not the one near where my friend Emma lived. These transactions require ID verification, Diane explained. We always check ID for withdrawals over $500. Would security cameras have recorded these transactions? I asked. Yes, but that footage is only available to bank security and law enforcement, she replied, clearly becoming suspicious of my questions. I thanked her and left, now certain that someone had impersonated me at the bank. But how? My driver's license had never left my possession. The answer came to me suddenly: my passport. I had misplaced it during my Christmas visit and assumed I had packed it in one of my bags. After searching my apartment in Philadelphia without finding it, I had planned to apply for a replacement. Could someone have taken it from my room during that holiday visit? My investigation took an unexpected turn when I ran into Gary, a high school friend who now worked at a local car dealership. During our catch-up conversation, he mentioned seeing my sister recently. Jillian was pretty upset when she came in last month, he said. Wanted to trade in her BMW for something cheaper. Said business was tough. This contradicted everything Jillian had projected about her successful marketing firm. Curious. I did some online research and discovered that her company website was little more than a template with minimal client work displayed. Their business address turned out to be a virtual office space that provided mail forwarding services rather than physical offices. My suspicions growing stronger, I took a risk and called Thomas, Jillian's husband, claiming I needed to send important family documents to their home address. Thomas sounded stressed and mentioned they had temporarily downsized to an apartment while their house was being renovated. When I pressed for details about the renovation, he became evasive and quickly ended the call. The pieces were starting to fit together, but I needed more concrete evidence. I returned to the bank the next day and spoke with a different teller, this time presenting myself honestly and explaining that I believed someone had impersonated me to withdraw money from my mother's account. The manager, Brandon, was called over. After verifying my identity and listening to my concerns, he agreed to check their records more thoroughly. I can't show you security footage, he explained, but I can verify whether the ID presented for those transactions matches your information. 20 minutes later, he returned with a troubled expression. The transactions were processed using a passport with your name, but the address on our verification form was listed as your parents' home, not your Philadelphia address. This was the smoking gun. My real passport had my Philadelphia address, not my parents' address. Someone had created a fake identification with my information, but a different address to avoid verification issues. There's something else, Brandon added. The signature on the withdrawal slips doesn't appear to match the one we have on file for you from when you were a secondary signer on your parents' account years ago. He couldn't provide copies of the slips due to bank policy, but his confirmation was enough. Someone had forged my signature. My next move was visiting the county records office. Jillian and Thomas had purchased their home 3 years ago with great fanfare, my parents proudly contributing to their down payment. Public records showed that they had taken out a second mortgage 8 months ago, and more disturbingly, the property now had a foreclosure notice filed against it. The final piece fell into place when I convinced Emma to accompany me to another branch of my mother's bank. Emma had an account there and requested information about her recent transactions. While the teller helped her, I scanned the lobby and spotted what I was looking for, a sign about their security camera retention policy. Footage was kept for 90 days. Armed with this information, I contacted a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud. After explaining my situation, she advised me on how to proceed and helped me draft a formal request for the bank to preserve the security footage as evidence in a potential fraud case. By the end of the week, I had assembled a compelling case, documentation of my whereabouts during the withdrawals, evidence of Jillian's financial troubles, proof that someone had used false identification in my name, and bank records showing the withdrawals were made locally by someone who knew my mother's account password. The most damning evidence came unexpectedly. The bank manager called me back after receiving my lawyer's letter. During their internal investigation, they discovered that the teller who had processed the fraudulent withdrawals recognized the person who had made them as a regular customer, one who had her own accounts at that branch. When shown photos of both me and Jillian, she identified Jillian without hesitation. I now had what I needed: bank teller slips with forged signatures, security camera timestamps, and a positive identification. My sister had systematically stolen from our parents while framing me for the crime. The question now was how to confront my family with this devastating truth. Back in my hotel room, the weight of everything I had discovered crashed down on me. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands shaking as I spread out the evidence of my sister's betrayal. The sister I had looked up to throughout childhood. The sister who had apparently been living a lie while systematically stealing from our parents and setting me up to take the blame. I broke down completely, sobs racking my body until I could barely breathe. It wasn't just about the money or even being falsely accused. It was the realization that my family had been willing, even eager, to believe the worst about me. After years of feeling like an outsider in my own family, this confirmation of my status hurt more deeply than I could have imagined. As night fell, memories flooded back with painful clarity. Jillian taking my toys and claiming they were hers when I complained. Jillian blaming me for breaking house rules she had violated. Jillian somehow always emerging as the victim even when she was clearly at fault. And our parents, particularly our father, consistently taking her side without question. I called the one person I knew would believe me without question. My best friend Lauren. They accused you of what? Lauren's voice rose in disbelief as I explained the situation. And you have proof it was Jillian? Oh my God, Sam. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice hoarse from crying. Part of me wants to mail them all the evidence and never speak to them again. You could do that, Lauren said thoughtfully. You don't owe them a confrontation after how they treated you. But would that give you closure? The question hung in the air as I considered my options. I could walk away from my family completely, evidence in hand, and start fresh without their toxic presence in my life. I could mail them the evidence anonymously, letting them deal with the fallout without me. I could go to the police and file charges against Jillian for identity theft and fraud. Or I could confront them directly, force them to face what they had done, and make them acknowledge their rush to judgment. I need to look them in the eyes when they realize how wrong they were. I finally decided. Not for revenge, but because I need them to really see me for once. Over the next 2 days, I developed a plan for the confrontation. I organized my evidence chronologically, making copies of everything. I wrote a letter to my mother expressing all the hurt and disappointment I had never been able to voice. I rehearsed what I would say when faced with denial, anger, or attempts to minimize what had happened. I also prepared myself for the possibility that even with irrefutable evidence, my family might still choose Jillian over me. They might find ways to excuse her actions or even suggest that I had somehow manipulated the evidence. Years of family dynamics had taught me that Jillian's position as the favorite child was unassailable. You need to be ready for them to disappoint you again, Lauren warned during our nightly call. Are you prepared for that? I think I am, I replied, though my stomach nodded at the thought. At least then I'll know exactly where I stand and can move forward without illusions. I practiced my confrontation speech in the mirror, working to maintain composure even as emotions threatened to overwhelm me. I needed to appear strong and certain, not hysterical or vindictive. I recorded myself, critiquing my delivery until I could present my case calmly and clearly. I also took practical steps to protect myself. I purchased a small recording device to document the confrontation. I arranged for Lauren to call me at specific times to check in. I booked a flight back to Philadelphia for immediately after the planned confrontation, regardless of the outcome. The night before I planned to return to my parents' house, I sat alone in my hotel room reading through old family emails and messages, searching for clues I might have missed about Jillian's financial situation. What I found was a pattern of subtle manipulation stretching back years. Hints about business challenges followed by miraculous last-minute saves. Vague references to clients who never seemed to materialize. Stories that shifted and changed with each telling. How had none of us seen through her? The answer was painful but clear. We had seen what we wanted to see. My parents had needed to believe in their golden child's success. I had needed to believe that my sister's apparent perfection was real, if only to justify my own feelings of inadequacy beside her. I wrote one final note to myself, a reminder of what this confrontation was really about. This isn't about punishing Jillian or humiliating my parents. It's about standing up for the truth and for myself. Whatever happens tomorrow, I know who I am and what I'm worth. As morning dawned, I gathered my evidence, checked my recording device, and took a deep breath. Today would change my family forever, for better or worse. I was as ready as I would ever be. I arrived at my parents' house just after 6 in the evening, timing my visit to coincide with their usual dinner hour. My rental car parked a block away to maintain the element of surprise. I approached the familiar front door with my heart pounding in my chest. Through the dining room window, I could see them gathered around the table, Jillian and Thomas included. The perfect family dinner without the troublesome younger daughter. I rang the doorbell, steeling myself for what was to come. My father opened the door, his expression shifting from confusion to cold anger when he saw me. "I told you not to come back until you returned the money," he said, blocking the entrance. "I have information about the missing money," I replied calmly. "Information you need to hear." He hesitated, then reluctantly stepped aside. "Make it quick. We're having dinner." I walked into the dining room where conversation stopped abruptly. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. Jillian's face drained of color momentarily before she composed herself. Thomas looked uncomfortable, while my aunt and uncle, present again for some reason, appeared startled by my arrival. "Samantha," my mother said weakly, "we didn't expect you." "Clearly," I replied, remaining standing as no one offered me a seat. "I'm here because I've spent the past week investigating the missing money from your account." "There's nothing to investigate," my father interrupted. "We know you took it." "You accused me without evidence and without giving me a chance to defend myself," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion building inside me. "Today, I'm going to show you exactly what happened to that money." "We have the bank statements," Jillian interjected. "The withdrawals happened when you were in Georgia." "Except I wasn't in Georgia on those dates," I countered, placing my work documentation on the table. "I was in Philadelphia, as these prove. Electronic entry logs from my office building. Client meeting recordings, credit card statements showing purchases in Philadelphia restaurants, cell phone tower data placing my phone in Pennsylvania, not Georgia." My father glanced at the papers, but made no move to examine them closely. "You could have hired someone to make the withdrawals. That's your defense?" "That I orchestrated an elaborate scheme to steal from my own mother." I shook my head in disbelief. "The bank requires ID for large withdrawals. Someone used identification with my name on it." "Your point?" my father demanded. "My point is that my ID never left my possession, except for my passport which disappeared during my Christmas visit here." I turned to Jillian, whose expression remained carefully neutral. "Strangely, right around the time I overheard you and Dad arguing about money problems." Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his seat, not looking at his wife. "You're trying to deflect blame," Jillian said, though I noticed her voice wasn't as confident as before. Classic Samantha, always making up stories. I removed more documents from my folder. My mother turned to Jillian with question in her eyes. "That's private information," Jillian snapped. "And completely irrelevant." "Is it?" I challenged. "Your business is failing too, isn't it? That impressive office space is just a virtual mailing address. You've been lying about your success for years while taking money from Mom and Dad whenever you needed it." Thomas abruptly stood up. "I told you we should have been honest with them," he said to Jillian before walking out of the room. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "What are you implying, Samantha?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." I placed another document on the table. The bank manager confirmed that someone using a passport with my name, but listing this house as the address made those withdrawals. My real passport has my Philadelphia address on it. Jillian stood up suddenly. "This is ridiculous. She's making all this up to cover her tracks." The moment had come. I reached into my bag and slowly, deliberately placed the bank teller slips on the counter, copies the bank had finally provided after my lawyer's intervention. The teller who processed these withdrawals positively identified the person who made them, I said quietly. "It wasn't me, Jillian. It was you." All color drained from Jillian's face. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father stared at the slips, then at Jillian, his expression unreadable. "That's impossible," Jillian whispered. But there was no conviction in her voice. "The signature on these slips doesn't match mine, but it's a close approximation," I continued. "You took my passport when I was here for Christmas. Had a fake one made with your address, and used it to withdraw money from Mom's account on weekends when you knew I had mentioned visiting Emma, creating the perfect setup to frame me." "I would never," Jillian began, but I cut her off. "Bank security cameras don't lie, Jillian. Neither does the teller who has known you for years as a regular customer at that branch. She recognized you immediately." My Aunt Carol made a small sound of distress. My Uncle Peter put his arm around my mother, who had begun to cry silently. Jillian's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand. We were going to lose everything. The business failed 6 months ago. The house, our cars, everything was being taken away. I was going to pay it back before anyone noticed." "By stealing from our sick mother and blaming me?" I asked incredulously. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," Jillian cried. "I just needed enough to keep the collectors away until our new business plan took off. Then Dad noticed the missing money sooner than I expected, and I panicked." My father had been unnaturally quiet. Now he spoke, his voice hollow. "You stole from your mother's medical account? And blamed your sister?" Jillian turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy, please." I was desperate. "I've always been your good girl. The successful one. I couldn't tell you we had failed." "So you let us believe Samantha was a thief?" my mother asked, her voice breaking. "You let us throw her out of our home?" "I was going to fix it," Jillian insisted. "Once things turned around, I would have replaced the money and found a way to clear Sam's name. And in the meantime, I was cut off from my family, branded a thief, and told not to come home," I said, the hurt of that betrayal still fresh. "Did you think about what that would do to me? Did you care?" Jillian couldn't meet my eyes. In her silence was my answer. Thomas returned to the room, his face grim. "There's more," he said. "Jillian, tell them the rest or I will." Jillian shot him a venomous look but said nothing. "This isn't the first time," Thomas continued. "The money for our house down payment 3 years ago, the emergency car replacement last year, the roof repairs, none of those things actually happened. It was all to cover business losses and our lifestyle." My father collapsed into a chair, the reality of years of deception hitting him all at once. "How much?" he asked faintly. "How much have you taken from us over the years?" Jillian's answer was barely audible. "Around $200,000 in total." The room erupted in chaos. My mother sobbed openly. My father shouted questions at Jillian. My aunt and uncle whispered frantically to each other. Thomas stood with his head bowed, accepting his part in the deception. And I stood silently, vindicated but hollow with the confirmation of what my family truly was. When the initial shock subsided, my father turned to me, his expression a complex mix of emotions. "Samantha, I don't know what to say. You believed the worst about me without a second thought," I replied. "You threw me out of this house and told me not to come back. That says everything I need to know about my place in this family." "We were wrong," my mother whispered. "So terribly wrong." Jillian, desperate to salvage something from the ruins of her deception, tried one last manipulation. I was under so much pressure. The business, keeping up appearances, Thomas's spending habits. I wasn't thinking clearly. "Don't you dare blame me for this," Thomas snapped. "I wanted to come clean months ago. You were the one who kept digging us deeper, taking more money, creating more lies." As they argued, I gathered my evidence back into my bag. I had done what I came to do. The truth was out, my name cleared. The rest was up to them. "I'm leaving now," I announced, cutting through their argument. "You have a lot to discuss as a family, and I'm clearly not part of that conversation." "Samantha, wait," my father called as I headed for the door. "We need to talk about this." I turned back one last time. "I've said everything I needed to say. You chose to believe I was capable of stealing from my own mother. You chose to believe Jillian over me, just like you always have. Now you know the truth, and you can decide what to do with it." With that, I walked out the door. the weight of years of family dysfunction finally lifting from my shoulders. The truth hadn't brought the reconciliation part of me had secretly hoped for, but it had brought something perhaps more valuable: freedom. The immediate hours after the confrontation passed in a blur. I returned to my hotel room, emotionally exhausted but strangely calm. My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages and calls from family members, but I silenced it, needing space to process everything that had happened. Lauren called on our prearranged schedule, and I gave her a condensed version of events. "I'm proud of you," she said firmly. That took incredible courage. "I don't feel courageous," I admitted. "I feel empty." "That's normal after something this intense." "What happens now?" "I don't know," I replied honestly. "I need time to figure that out." The next morning, I awoke to more missed calls and a text from my Uncle Peter asking if we could meet for coffee. Of all my family members, he had been the least quick to judge me, so I agreed. The local diner was quiet as we sat across from each other, steam rising from our untouched coffees. "Your parents are devastated," he began. "Not just about the money, but about how they treated you." "And Jillian?" I couldn't help asking. "She and Thomas left last night. Your father insisted they stay and face what they'd done, but Jillian couldn't handle it. She left a note saying she needed time." Of course she did. Accountability had never been my sister's strong suit. "The bank is pursuing fraud charges," Peter continued. "Your parents didn't want to involve the police, but the bank made the decision for them once they had confirmation of identity theft." I nodded, unsurprised. Financial institutions don't take kindly to elaborate fraud schemes. "Your mother would like to see you," he added gently. "She's been crying since you left yesterday." Part of me wanted to rush to her, to comfort her as I always had. Another part, the part still raw from betrayal, hesitated. "I need a little more time," I said finally. Peter nodded in understanding. "For what it's worth, I never fully believed you had taken that money. It didn't fit with who you are." "Then why didn't you say something?" I asked. The question that had been haunting me. He looked ashamed. "Family dynamics. Your father was so convinced, and I didn't have any evidence to counter his certainty. I should have trusted my instincts about you, and I'm sorry I didn't." His apology, the first genuine one I'd received, loosened something tight in my chest. At least one person had doubted my guilt, even if silently. Later that afternoon, I received a call from my father. His voice sounded older, more subdued than I had ever heard it. "Samantha, I know you probably don't want to talk to me, and I understand that. But I need to say this. I was wrong. Completely wrong. The way I treated you, the things I accused you of, there's no excuse." I remained silent, letting him continue. "I've always been harder on you than on Jillian. I think because you reminded me so much of myself at your age, stubborn and independent. I pushed against those qualities instead of admiring them." He paused. "I don't expect forgiveness right now, or maybe ever. But I want you to know that I'm truly sorry for failing you as a father." The words I had waited years to hear. Coming too late and under the worst possible circumstances. Still, they mattered. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied carefully. "I need time to process everything." "Of course," he said quickly. "Take all the time you need. We'll be here when and if you're ready to talk more." The conversation with my mother came 2 days later, after I had extended my hotel stay. We met at a quiet park, neutral territory for both of us. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by events. When she embraced me, I felt her trembling. "I should have believed in you," she said simply, tears filling her eyes. A mother should know her own child's character. "Why didn't you?" I asked, the question that had haunted me most of all. She looked away, gathering her thoughts. "I've spent years keeping the peace, going along with your father's decisions, trying to balance his expectations with what I knew in my heart. Somewhere along the way, I lost my voice, my ability to stand up for what I knew was right." She met my eyes directly. "It's not an excuse. Just the sad truth of what I've become." Her honesty touched me more deeply than any elaborate apology could have. "What happens now with Jillian?" I asked. The bank is pressing charges for fraud and identity theft. She's hired a lawyer. My mother sighed heavily. Your father and I are trying to decide how much to support her through this. She did a terrible thing, but she's still our daughter. So am I said quietly. Yes, she acknowledged, taking my hand. And we failed you terribly. I failed you. The conversation continued, painful but necessary. By its end, we had reached no neat resolution. But a fragile bridge had begun to form between us. Jillian reached out a week later, not with an apology, but with excuses and subtle accusations. This has destroyed my life, she wrote in a lengthy email. Criminal charges, my reputation ruined, my marriage falling apart. I was desperate and made terrible choices, but did you have to expose everything so publicly? Couldn't we have handled this privately as a family? Her inability to take full responsibility confirmed what I had always suspected. Jillian saw herself as the victim in every scenario, even one entirely of her own making. I didn't respond to her message. Thomas called me the following day, his voice tired and resigned. I'm filing for divorce, he said without preamble. I knew about some of the financial problems, but not the extent of the deception or that she was stealing from your parents. I can't be part of this anymore. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Thomas had been complicit to some degree, but it was clear Jillian had been the driving force behind the fraud. I wanted to apologize for my part in all this, he continued, and to thank you for bringing it to light. As painful as this is, living with those lies was destroying me. As weeks passed, the legal consequences for Jillian became clearer. Facing substantial evidence, she accepted a plea deal that included restitution, community service, and probation, but avoided jail time due to being a first-time offender. My parents, despite everything, helped pay for her legal representation and agreed to a repayment plan for the stolen funds. The family scandal couldn't be contained within our immediate circle. Word spread through relatives, family friends, and eventually the broader community. People who had admired Jillian's apparent success now gossiped about her downfall. People who had dismissed my more modest career now saw me in a different light. I returned to Philadelphia after 2 weeks, needing to get back to my clients and the life I had built independently. The distance helped me gain perspective on everything that had happened. My father's attempts at reconciliation continued through awkward phone calls and tentative text messages. He was trying, in his limited way, to rebuild some kind of relationship with me. My mother and I spoke more regularly. Our conversations gradually becoming less about the betrayal and more about reconnecting as individuals. Jillian remained the elephant in the room. She had moved to another state to start fresh. According to my mother, our direct communication remained non-existent. Whether we would ever repair our relationship remained an open question, one I wasn't ready to address. Throughout these tumultuous weeks, I maintained my boundaries firmly. I engaged with my family on my terms when I felt emotionally prepared to do so. I prioritized my work, my friendships, and my own healing above family obligations or expectations. 3 months after the confrontation, my mother visited me in Philadelphia, the first time any family member had seen my life there. We spent the weekend exploring the city, talking honestly about the past and cautiously considering the future. I'm proud of the life you've built, she told me as we sat in my small but sunny apartment. I should have said that years ago. Thank you, I replied, the words meaning more than I could express. Your father wants to visit next month, she added carefully. If you're comfortable with that. I considered the offer, weighing my lingering hurt against the possibility of a healthier relationship moving forward. One step at a time, I said finally. But maybe in a few months. She nodded, accepting my timeline without pressure. It was a small but significant shift in our dynamic. As summer turned to fall, the acute pain of betrayal gradually transformed into something more manageable. Not forgotten, not fully healed, but no longer consuming my daily thoughts. I had stood up for myself when it mattered most, refused to accept false blame, and forced the truth into the light. Whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. 6 months after the confrontation that changed everything, I stood in my newly rented apartment in Boston, unpacking boxes in what felt like a symbolic fresh start. Philadelphia had begun to feel too small, too connected to painful memories. Boston offered new opportunities for my design business and enough distance from both Georgia and Philadelphia to truly begin again. My decision to move hadn't been impulsive, but carefully considered. After the dust settled from Jillian's legal proceedings, I found myself wanting physical distance from the entire situation. Boston had always appealed to me with its blend of history and innovation. Perfect for my creative work. Lauren helped me move, staying for a week to help me settle in. Her unwavering support throughout the ordeal had deepened our friendship into something that felt more like family than my blood relations ever had. "This place is perfect for you," she said, arranging books on my new shelves. "It feels like a blank canvas." "That's exactly what I needed," I agreed. "A space that has no connection to everything that happened." In the months since the confrontation, I had gradually established new boundaries with my family. My mother and I spoke weekly, our conversations increasingly normal as the initial rawness faded. She had begun therapy, working through her own patterns of enabling and conflict avoidance that had contributed to our family dysfunction. My father and I maintained a more distant relationship, connecting monthly through brief phone calls that were civil if not warm. He was trying in his own way, though years of entrenched patterns couldn't be overcome quickly. He had finally stopped making excuses for Jillian, a shift that surprised me more than it probably should have. As for Jillian herself, our estrangement continued. Occasionally my mother would mention her, noting that she and Thomas had finalized their divorce and she had moved to Florida for a fresh start. She was working an ordinary office job and making regular restitution payments to our parents. According to my mother, she had expressed remorse, though notably, not directly to me. My own healing journey had been neither linear nor simple. There were days when anger would resurface unexpectedly, triggered by a random memory or a passing comment. There were nights when I would dream about the confrontation, waking with my heart racing and tears on my face. But these moments became less frequent as time passed. I found unexpected solace in a support group for people who had experienced family betrayal. Hearing others' stories of manipulation, gaslighting, and false accusations made me feel less alone in my experience. More importantly, seeing others who had moved beyond their trauma gave me hope for my own recovery. "Family betrayal cuts deeper than any other kind," said Maggie, a woman in her 50s who had become a mentor of sorts to me. "The people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are the ones who hurt you most." Processing that takes time. Professionally, my design business thrived in Boston's creative environment. I landed several significant clients within months of moving, allowing me financial security I hadn't previously known. The irony wasn't lost on me that as Jillian's false success crumbled, my authentic career was flourishing. 9 months after the confrontation, my mother visited my Boston apartment. It was her second visit, the first having been shortly after I moved. This time felt different, more relaxed as we established new patterns of interaction. Over dinner at a small Italian restaurant near my apartment, she shared updates on her life. Her health had stabilized with a new treatment protocol. She had joined a book club and reconnected with old friends. Small steps toward reclaiming her identity outside of family caretaker. "Your father wants to visit next month," she mentioned carefully. "On his own. Would that be okay?" I considered the request. My last interaction with him had been a strained phone call on my birthday. "I think I'm ready for that," I said finally. She smiled, relief evident in her expression. "He's changed, Samantha." "Not completely, not perfectly, but he's trying." "I'm willing to see that for myself," I replied. My father's visit was indeed different from what I would have expected a year earlier. He arrived with an uncharacteristic humility, appreciative of my home, and genuinely interested in my work. Over dinner, he spoke openly about his therapy sessions, his recognition of how his controlling behavior had damaged our family. I was so focused on financial security that I lost sight of what really matters, he admitted. And then when the financial betrayal came, it was from the last person I expected. The irony isn't lost on me. It's still hard for me to understand how quickly you believed I could steal from Mom, I said, broaching the subject we had mostly avoided in our recent communications. He nodded, accepting the challenge. I've thought about that a lot. I think I was so invested in the narrative of Jillian as the perfect daughter that when evidence suggested otherwise, it was easier to believe you were the problem. It was never about who you actually were, but about protecting the family story I had created in my mind. He looked down at his plate. It's not an excuse. Just the truth of my failure. His candor surprised me. The father I had grown up with would never have admitted such a fundamental mistake. Perhaps people could change, at least incrementally, when forced to confront their deepest flaws. On the anniversary of the confrontation, I took a personal day, spending it in reflection at a quiet park near my apartment. The year had brought more change than I could have imagined. I had lost the family I thought I had, but gained clarity about who they really were. I had lost my sister, perhaps permanently, but strengthened friendships that provided more authentic support than she ever had. I had been falsely accused and briefly cast out, but emerged stronger in my sense of self and worth. I had also learned profound lessons about truth and trust, about the courage required to stand up for yourself when everyone around you doubts your integrity, about the liberation that comes from removing toxic relationships, even when those relationships are with family, about the possibility of rebuilding connections on healthier terms, with appropriate boundaries firmly in place. Most importantly, I had learned that family is not solely defined by blood. Family can be chosen, built through authentic connections with people who see your true self and value you accordingly. Lauren, my support group, even new friends in Boston had become a kind of family. One based on mutual respect rather than obligation or history. As the seasons changed and another year began, I settled into my new normal. Regular but boundaried contact with my parents. A thriving business. A growing circle of genuine friends. Occasional therapy sessions to continue processing the complex emotions surrounding family betrayal. My mother updated me periodically about Jillian, who had completed her community service and continued making restitution payments. According to my mother, she had expressed interest in eventually reaching out to me. I remained non-committal about that possibility, neither refusing outright nor actively seeking reconciliation. Some wounds need more time than others to heal, if they ever fully do. What remained undamaged, even strengthened through adversity, was my sense of self. The false accusation and subsequent vindication had stripped away any remaining need to seek my family's approval or validation. I knew who I was, what I stood for, and what I deserved from relationships. That clarity was worth the painful journey that had led to it. Standing up for myself against those who should have believed in me from the start had been the hardest thing I'd ever done. It had also been the most necessary. In choosing truth over comfortable lies, in refusing to accept blame for someone else's actions, I had reclaimed not just my reputation but my power. The journey from accused to vindicated had transformed me in ways I was still discovering. Not all family stories have perfect endings with neat resolutions and complete healing. Some, like mine, continue as works in progress, with tentative steps forward and occasional steps back. The important thing was that I was writing my own story now, no longer a character in someone else's narrative. Has your family ever wrongly accused you of something? Have you ever had to stand up for your truth when no one believed you? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength through difficult family situations. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember that sometimes the hardest moments in our lives lead to the most meaningful growth.